This week on the Powell Not Found podcast, we're talking about the greatest roast of all time, Tom Brady, the release of a 55-year-old movie, Let It Be, on Disney+, and some Nintendo stuff and Yankee talk to round out the show. Let's hit it. Let's go right now.
I'm gonna tell you a story about a girl who loves gin. A national pandemic seized her birthday celebration. Although she knew it was coming, we tried not to tell her. She brewed some Irish breakfast tea. She knew her birthday was getting corona.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 19 of the Powell Not Found podcast. I am your host, Mark Powell of Powell Not Found. This podcast is on Mother's Day weekend. Happy Mother's Day to everybody and every mother out there. Hopefully you guys are celebrating. Hopefully you have nailed down a reservation somewhere to go to dinner and celebrate those mothers that do the hard work every single day of raising people in the world. So do yourself a favor, take a little bit of a beat this week and celebrate your mom and try to go find a present really, really quickly. If you haven't, well, we're recording this on Friday, so time is a-ticking. So you better get up to Amazon and get something really, really quick. Overnight shipping to get to your mother. So happy Mother's Day, everybody. And this week, we're also talking some things that are pretty close to my heart personality-wise. We're talking some Nintendo stuff. We're talking, obviously, Yankees stuff each week like we do. And we're talking a Beatles documentary, which, to be honest, I feel like after doing about 19 episodes and the fact that the Beatles have not come up that often is pretty impressive. I mean, I'm a big Beatles fan. I was raised on the Beatles. So the fact that I'm going to take about 20 minutes to wax poetic about them, that's an accomplishment. We made it to episode 19. That's 19 weeks, guys. That's almost 5 months without really waxing poetic about the Beatles. But Disney Plus gave me no choice but to start talking about the Beatles again in a 21st century context. But first, I want to get into our first subject, which is the roast of Tom Brady, another thing close to my heart, the New England Patriots. I grew up a New England Patriots fan, became a Bucs fan for a few short years, and then when Brady left, couldn't care less about the Bucs. And I didn't even know it was happening. I've been this out of the loop lately that I didn't really realize the roast of Tom Brady, which happened on Netflix. It was a live event because apparently Netflix is now dabbling in live events like television. I know that John Mulaney's Everybody's in L.A., the talk show, is also live. I kind of stumbled upon that this weekend. So more and more live event programming from Netflix coming about, and including this one called The Greatest Roast of All Time by Tom Brady. And so if you've ever seen a roast in the current format that it's in, it usually involves Jeff Ross and some slate of comedians and friends or whatever, and it kind of follows the same formulaic, kind of script. We're talking uncomfortable jokes, we're talking a little bit of stand-up, and we're talking basically some quick reaction shots to people being slightly entertained, uncomfortable. It seems to be a little bit of a mix of both. But this premiered over the weekend. Let me get the sound down on this here. And hosted by Kevin Hart. Tom Brady decided to go along with Jeff Ross and roast himself on his incredible career. This is obviously a guy who went 7-3 in the Super Bowl. 10 Super Bowl appearances, 7 wins. And so he's been in the cultural zeitgeist for more than 25 years, essentially. So why wouldn't you? He seems like a perfect candidate to do this kind of thing. I watched it, and I should preface this with, I'm not a big fan of these roasts in general, especially the current format. And I'm not sure if I was ever really a fan of the old format, talking about like the Dean Martin roasts. with Don Rickles and Johnny Carson and Ronald Reagan and all these people that would line up on the dais in this long, long dais. I tend to think that it reminds me too much of being in a comedy room, one that's not, not a special, not like a properly, well formatted comedy show, not like a proper show, like a Jim Gaffigan show or a Seinfeld show or whatever. It reminds me of being in a room with comedians that you don't know and seeing a showcase, because there's going to be a lot of crowd work, a lot of material that just seems like it's underdone. And this didn't stray that far away from my previous opinion going in. I knew the roast was going to be uncomfortable. This was 3 hours long, this show on Netflix, this live event. And this might come from the inexperience of not realizing what roasts are like nowadays, because I don't watch them. I don't know anybody who really consumes them that much. I feel like this one got a lot of play because it was Tom Brady, right? A relatively, and I say that in big quotes, a relatively likable figure if you're a Patriots fan. If you're a fan of any other team, this is not a likable character. And it was long. I mean, a 3-hour event to me feels like something you hear about with the Golden Globes or the Oscars. And even those every single year get criticized for how long they are. Like, do we really need to sit through, best sound Foley, artist? Do we have to sit through best gaff tape application award? Like, speed it up. It could be an hour and a half. We all have things to do. Sitting around for 3 hours listening to okay jokes to bad jokes about Tom Brady and his misfortune is not necessarily something I was going to go out of my way to watch. That being said, I had heard after this thing had debuted, I guess it must have been Sunday night, this last Sunday, that it debuting, people were talking about it. People were saying it was hilarious. It was great. And so I had some time this week. So I decided to kind of sit down and watch all 3 hours of this roast for Tom Brady. Now, I suggest if you're going to sit here and watch the whole thing, just be, keep in mind, you're going to feel numb after hearing essentially the same joke about Tom Brady said about 5-6 different ways. And this sounds like I'm being very, very critical of the roast, but I don't really like roasts in general. I find that they're kind of low-brow humor. They're blue humor. I feel like they're kind of insulting, and yet that might just be me not getting it, right? I fully cop to that maybe I just don't quite, I'm not on the same level, to sit here and watch these people make these jokes and sit in that uncomfortability. But it just reminds me of being in a comedy show, because you have to get used to being uncomfortable sometimes with people saying jokes or bombing or really falling flat on their face when the joke doesn't work. In this case, these jokes, they work in a sense because you know that people are going to react to them because they're sitting in a gigantic room. It was at the LA Forum, I believe. And you're talking about, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. So like the law of averages is going to say that, hey, if you're going to say something shocking, there's going to be some sort of reaction. Lineup was very, very interesting for this roast in general. I had it up here for a second. But you're talking about, Bill Belichick was a nice surprise. Robert Kraft was there. You had some comedians on the dais. Nikki Glaser, I think, came out the clear, obvious winner of that roast, just because of her fast delivery. I didn't think every single joke that she made actually, landed, but I thought that her delivery was so fast and so quick that even if something didn't work, she was on to the next one. Right? That was kind of an interesting style. There were Rob Gronkowski. Delivered an interesting roast of him. Ben Affleck, all these it was just person after person after person after person after person. Randy Moss, who, delivered a, not quite, a roast that kind of worked, but again, these guys are not comedians, and, but again, I kind of left. My opinion of this show is kind of divided, right? I kind of agree with Ricky Gervais's kind of like nothing is off limits kind of idea about comedy. But when you watch this show, I couldn't help but kind of feel empathy for Tom Brady sitting up there while they're kind of talking about things that must be really sensitive, right? Including his marriage, including his failed endeavors, including his, relationship with Robert Kraft. It was just so targeted. And I think in the beginning, you have someone like Kevin Hart saying, get used to being uncomfortable because this is what it's like. Which then begs the question, why would you do this to yourself? Why would you put yourself through this if you didn't have some sort of masochistic tendency to want to be made fun of, or is this validating? I don't quite understand why anybody would put themselves through that kind of torture to have a good time, right? Other than the fact that, hey, it pays well, it's going to be good publicity, and maybe it changes everybody's image of me. Rightfully so. I don't necessarily think I looked at Tom Brady as anything else other than great quarterback, right? And maybe this is like part of his image shift in terms of, becoming a broadcaster. If you can make fun of yourself, maybe people think that you're more likable. It was just uncomfortable. the whole time watching the show, I just kind of felt like, I don't know why you would put yourself through this. I also feel like the roast is kind of at odds with culture. And what I mean by that is like some of these jokes, and again, this makes me sound a little bit like a prude, but like some of these jokes I feel like are just not appropriate. If you said these things in public, I feel like culture would be after you, but like if you say it in front of a dais on a large streaming platform, all of a sudden you're okay. Some of these things are kind of a little bit degrading, and you can tell just judging by if you read anything about the fallout. Some of the subjects of these jokes, their families were not happy about it, right? You had Giselle's, camp, I guess, basically state that they were not happy about a lot of the things that were said. And you got to think, as a person who's raising a family with his ex-wife, like this is definitely going to come up the next time you talk, right? Like that this was probably like not exactly a great thing to do for anybody involved, right? Because these jokes just stir up everyone's personal life. So again, I get back to like, why would you put yourself through this, right? And I have a feeling that the roasts just kind of like are this kind of forum that people can say whatever they want, and people will act like it's like a form of free speech. But it just feels like a type of comedy that doesn't need to exist anymore in today's society. It feels like very lowbrow. I'm not saying there weren't parts of it that were enjoyable to watch. There were some jokes that I thought were really, really funny. I thought the cryptocurrency joke that Nikki Glaser said about Rob Gronkowski is great. It kind of comes at the cost of Rob Gronkowski's intelligence, which kind of sucks. But again, that's like playing into that stereotype. He kind of got everybody back at the end by saying like, you guys think I'm a freaking idiot or something like that. It was interesting to watch. I do think that it just feels like out of place in today's world. And it may have felt that way out of place back then too, when Dean Martin was doing it with Don Rickles. I mean, if you look at Don Rickles' act, I don't know if Don Rickles' act survives in today's culture at all. It's of a time, and it's no longer. It's just, I don't know if it's funny anymore. It's not. I don't know if it was funny then. like Don Rickles is an interesting cat that in that way. It's all obviously done in absurdity, but it's just kind of an interesting thing to reckon with. the other thing that kind of really came out at me about this roast was just the other thing that kind of came out as a glaring thing about this roast, other than the jokes and the length of it was just way too long. Just tighten it up. I mean, again, we've got things to do. It made me feel just completely out of touch in terms of who was relevant in today's world of comedy. And I know it's harder and harder and harder each year to stay relevant with the amount of access that we have to everything. And the way that the internet serves up material to us is very targeted, right? So Discovery, if you thought Discovery was hard years ago, Discovery is getting harder and harder and harder each day to fight with an algorithm that wants to send you the same thing over and over again, right? That said, I don't know any of these comedians. I mean, Nikki Glaser, I knew of, and I've seen her around Netflix and her specials and stuff like that. Kill Tony, I couldn't tell you who it is. And that's not anything against him. I just don't know him. It just he hasn't been served up to me in any way. The comedians on the dais, I just don't know, right? And they had no relevance. And I start to wonder, you saw some pretty famous comedian faces in the audience, like Gaffigan, like Joel McHale. Like, is it hard to find comedians who want to do this kind of show is my question, because some of the comedians that I've met just in life, and these are younger amateur comedians that are coming up the ranks or whatever at the time, usually a lot of them are very, very emotional. And in order to be a performer, you have to be somewhat emotionally connected. I wonder if a lot of people just don't want to participate in something like that because they would feel too bad after the fact, right? There's even reports, I guess, of like Kevin Hart sending gifts to Tom Brady, like a very, very expensive gift to Tom Brady for even doing it, right? They even made mention of Jeff Ross kind of like reassuring Tom Brady, hey, no, are you doing good during the show, right? So I wonder if they just have a hard time getting participation for these things in general, which would kind of explain why some of these comedians are like, who are these people? But maybe I'm out of touch. It made me feel like I'm like, well, maybe I'm just not looking to see who is who's the on top of the current world of comedy. I'm just, maybe I'm out of touch. But it just felt like it's not. Whenever you see these roasts come up, whether they be this one in this incarnation, this Netflix incarnation, or some of the old Comedy Central roasts, it's like you would know half of them just from stuff that would be on the television. But never to the point where I'm like, I just completely feel like out of the loop here. I also feel like, too, my last point about this, too, is that you have to... Kevin Hart did a good job hosting. I think that he did the best that he could with a 3-hour show. I think that's a hard thing to do. But, man, I feel like half of those roasts, even if the joke is not funny, they'll cut to a person reacting wildly. Now, I've heard a lot of jokes in my life. I'm never sure I've reacted that hard to anything, just getting up, standing up, clapping my hands, whooping and hollering. Like this is a performance, right? Because does anybody laugh that hard in real life? I think they want to have such a big reaction because those big reactions will just elicit more laughter, even when something's not as funny. And you can kind of see it too. Sometimes when things were bombing, when things were really, really not going well, they would cut to Kevin Hart reacting, and that was more of the joke, so they could try to save and keep the momentum going. But maybe you won't have to worry about momentum problems if they just kept it shorter. 3 hours. 3 hours for a roast. Like, I love Tom Brady. I love what he did for New England. I love what he brought and the excitement he brought to football. I don't know if I want to watch 3 hours of him of his jokes about him. If Patrick Mahomes wins, 5 more Super Bowls, are we going to be in for a 3-hour show about Patrick Mahomes getting roasted? I just don't have any interest. So again, my review of the greatest roast of all time, Probably more negative than people think, but I'm just trying to think critically about what I felt about it, because it wasn't as insanely positive as everybody else reaction was. I just kind of felt like it was there were moments of it that was good. It was a little bit long. I felt like the biggest wins out of that came from Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick seemed so much more entertaining than anything else in that show. Bill Belichick's appearances, and especially his appearance in the Dynasty, he mentions in this roast, was a very negative depiction of him. Since he's been on appearances with the Pat McAfee show, he's been on this roast here. He's done some video clips at the NFL draft. Like, the more and more and more I see Bill Belichick, just relaxed Bill Belichick, the more entertaining he becomes, and the more interesting he becomes as a panelist. He did something with the NFL draft where he really broke down New England's pick for the NFL draft. I believe his name is Drake May, right? Let me just double check that. Drake May, right? Yeah, Drake May for the New England Patriots, and he kind of tears apart his game a little bit on the Pat McAfee show. It's the most interesting that show has ever been, because you get to kind of see the inside, the workings of Bill Belichick and what he sees in a quarterback. Was the most interesting part of the NFL draft. If you haven't seen that clip, just go look at the Pat McAfee show. Go look for that clip of Bill Belichick talking about Drake May. It's really, really interesting, and it's the most entertaining he's ever been. He went from zero to hero so quickly, with giving everybody nothing at press conferences to giving everybody basically a full window to what he sees now that he is post-coaching career. So in this roast, it was the same thing. He got back at his players. Whether he wrote the jokes or not, it's kind of irrelevant. He seemed to be comfortable going after his players. It was a good balance of, like, good, clean jokes, nothing really over the top, and going at people, and soft ribbing. And I think he made the perfect balance. And he didn't seem like he was really performing. It just seemed like he was naturally him. It was. I think he was the biggest winner coming out of that roast. Even having to do a weird celebratory shot with Robert Kraft, forcibly by Kevin Hart's hand, he still came out a pretty good winner. So go watch the roast, see what you think about it. I don't know if these things have necessarily a place in today's society. I would imagine that they don't. But clearly it was a success for Netflix, and people were talking about it. I just might not be the demographic that really enjoys those types of things. So let's take a quick break, really quick, and we'll come back with some waxing poetic about the Beatles' new release of Let It Be. And we'll be right back with the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of the episode 19. Everybody go ahead and follow us on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube at Powell Not Found, and you can find all of the video version of the show on the YouTube, the audio version on the podcast. We're also on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. So go ahead and follow all the social media accounts you can. This is going to be my favorite part of the show, because I get to talk about something I'm really passionate about, and I've always been really passionate about. It is the Beatles. Even the song that's playing behind us, The Girl Who Loves Gin, you can clearly tell it's a Beatles-esque song in nature, just from the way I'm singing and stuff like that. And that's because I've grown up with the Beatles. My first record that I really bought was A Hard Day's Night. The first record that we owned as getting interested in the Beatles was Yellow Submarine. So an interesting entryway to that. And so this week, Peter Jackson, along with Disney Plus, released Let It Be, the old 1970s, a 1970 movie that obviously had the album accompany it. And really that documented the end of the Beatles and the last live performance of the Beatles. Now, a couple years ago, if it wasn't last year, I think it may have been 2 years ago, they released Get Back, right, which was basically releasing a long 3-part, 4-part series that showed all the extra footage that director Micheal Lindsay Hogg had, right? And they restored it, and they made this basically 4x3 shot film thing, and they used the power of AI and machine learning to kind of expand it and restore the footage. And that was incredible. An incredible job by Peter Jackson, who previously, sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit, but previously Peter Jackson restored some World War I footage for a movie called They Shall Not Grow Old. And if you've never watched that movie that he put out, that's a really, really touching documentary about people who fought in World War I. And he restores footage using AI technology, using machine learning, using his system that they created called Mal to restore the footage so that it feels like you're there, right? Now with the Beatles, I guess he got access to all the footage, and they released Get Back, which was a very, very long, Lord of the Rings long delve into why Let It Be was not as negative of a film as it has been purported to be, right? The stigma against this film was always that it was the end of the Beatles. It was kind of like a look inside of how negative the group was becoming, which was, even before I had seen it, I had heard people say, yeah, it's not a very good movie, Let It Be. And it's a lot of them bickering back and forth. As I watched it as an adult, you kind of realize that there's like 2 moments where they really bicker, and you don't really see the fallout as much as it's been reported about since, right? Get Back does a probably better job showing you the entire story narrative of what happened, and moments that they don't necessarily get into and Let It Be at all, about George leaving the group, the different emotional reactions that Paul and John have from the group breaking up, the bickering, the sniping, the patronizing nature of John and Paul towards the other members of the band, George and Ringo. Get Back does a great job delineating that and showing you that and really giving you proper context that Let It Be just didn't give you, right? If you're not a big Beatles fan and you watch this film, it really does feel like you're just a fly on the wall, right? To a band rehearsing for a concert that is on the roof, right? You're not getting a sense of what's happening, why it's important, and what's going on, because there's really none of that, right? The original film cuts so much that it really gives you this condensed version of like, what's going on? It gives you no context, gives you no narrative. So if you were to watch this, I would actually suggest you watch Get Back first and then watch the original film, because it gives you so much more understanding of what's happening and, and why things are occurring, right? If you just watch this film without watching the context of Get Back and you don't know the Beatles, you start wondering, why is Billy Preston there? He just pops up, right? Why are they in one location then in another? You miss so many critical parts of why this is important, and historically why this is a film about the band breaking up, right? In 1970, I can imagine when this thing was released, it's no wonder this thing took on the reputation of being a documentary about the Beatles breaking up, because the Beatles broke up in 1970, right? I think they were dissolved in 71, right? And by the courts, right? So when you have that kind of floating around in the news and then you watch this, you start kind of applying your own bias there about like, oh, they must have been at each other's throats. And I think that's what Get Back a couple of years ago dispelled, right? When you watch this stuff now, when you watch the film now, you don't really get that connotation anymore. You know it's the end of their careers, but I think it comes with a little bit more understanding that, well, they're adults. They're drifting apart, right? That's what happens, right? With people that are, artistically growing into their own, right? You got to think that when this thing is filmed, John is 29, Paul is 27, George is 26, and Ringo's 29, right? Which, to be honest, is like a ripe time to have a crisis in your life, right? Of what you want to do for the rest of your life, right? 55 years on, watching this and being older than the Beatles at this point, at that time, you kind of start to understand why everything's a little bit more emotionally dramatic than it probably should be. And also we have the benefit of hearing context. We have 55 years of context of people talking about it ad nauseum, and Paul McCartney adding his additional, well, this is how we felt. This is how I felt. This is how John felt. This is how George felt. All that kind of stuff. The movie, I had read previously that the movie was critically panned back then for being a movie that had no plot, was kind of dawdling, and didn't really have any structure to it. All of those criticisms still apply today, right? Despite the fact that they've restored it and made it look good and made it sound good, right? It adds to it adds to the movie, but it still doesn't take away from the movie that the movie feels like it's a recovery. And Micheal Lindsay Hogg, in the beginning, they have an interview with him and Peter Jackson 55 years later, in 2023, I guess, basically saying as much, saying that we thought it was going to be a concert movie, but we had to kind of shift in the middle of filming, and we realized we were filming a documentary. So we didn't go about this in a way that was prepared. We were kind of doing it on the fly. And that's what it feels like. It feels like a movie that was really stitched together as like a last hope of, okay, well, we have a lot of footage. Let's stitch it together in somewhat of an enjoyable way. And if you look at it that way, it's actually kind of an accomplishment of what they put together, because there's no plot. Like, you're just watching a band create music, right? It doesn't have any structure, but it kind of has a flow, right? If you know the Beatles. It is fun to see them kind of interact. It's also fun to see it in a really nice format where people can enjoy it. I don't know if there was any kind of hesitation from the Beatles Corporation, Apple, whatever you want to call it now, to release this movie, but I felt like the acclaim behind the four Beatles movies was always, Hard Day's Night was first, Help was like second, Magical Mystery Tour was like, a psychedelic experience that no one wanted to remember, and then Let It Be, right? Hard Day's Night was, I think a success then, and it's always been a success from re-releases, and it's always showing the Beatles in the best light. That's a properly directed, and I say properly directed in quotes because it's not the greatest thing in the world in terms of movies, but it's fun. It's a collection of music videos, if you will, for the Beatles in their prime early years, right? It is the stereotype of what everyone thinks of Beatlemania is that film. Help is kind of the same thing, bad plot, British film, whatever. Magical Mystery Tour just seems like an experiment gone wrong, but I think it's so weird that it works on its own. And again, still has that same, like, it's a collection of music videos, right? that kind of string it together. It's music videos before music videos really knew what to do with themselves, right? This isn't Michael Jackson's Thriller where it's a huge production. It is a string of them spliced together. Let It Be is a different concept, right? I think it's a clever it's a clever concept, but I felt like it was never advertised even when I was a kid with big availability, because I think that the reputation behind the film was always, it was Paul being Paul McCartney, and it was him being negative. It was him kind of, controlling the group. And I think that reputation that the film got for it being like an ugly period of the band's lifetime stopped, I think, the Beatles Corporation from really pushing it forward as like, hey, go watch this movie. I think Get Back helped this movie get this release, because with that proper context of people having fun, and Paul McCartney even said so in an interview, I think, with Peter Jackson, saying, I knew it was fun because I remember being in it, but the film doesn't show a lot of those fun moments of it, of them being a band together. They focus on kind of them bickering a little bit more. I think with Get Back as a proper background, this film could coexist now. And so it's good to see that they've actually done that and released it. It was hard to find as a kid, even on VHS, on DVD. There wasn't a lot of places that actually had the original film out. And that's what I was talking about. It's just like the availability of this film was very, very low in the 55 years since. And so I'm sure an amazing Beatle fan will be like, no, it wasn't. But, I'm not chasing these things down like it's gold in a river, right? But yeah, go check it out. It's an interesting, if you like the Beatles, you're definitely going to check it out anyways. If you don't like the Beatles, go check out Get Back, what they released with this thing. But, maybe watch this first, maybe watch it in a different order. It gives you a proper appreciation for what's happening, and shows you a band basically at the very precipice trying to hold it all together. And it's just an interesting peek behind the curtain of what it was like towards the end, and gives you some funny moments. It humanizes the Beatles in a way that I think they rarely get humanized, right? Just seeing them talk to each other, seeing Paul McCartney talk to John Lennon in a way of like expressing some sort of stressful moment. It humanizes them. It makes you realize that these are just insanely creative people working hard at something and trying to work out the kinks here and there. If anything, check out this movie too, just to see George working through I Me Mine, or Ringo and George working through Octopus's Garden. It's worth just that view. And then watch Get Back. So it's an enjoyable thing. It's a re-release that I think has finally gotten proper context, and it's a fun to see my favorite band and what they did at the very, very end. And it's good to have all this footage of them, because the footage looks great. Whatever they're doing and whatever they're doing with the sound with that technology is just astounding, because it sounds way better. And this is a way better viewing experience than how I watched this movie years ago, which I think was in 2002, on somebody had bootlegged it on YouTube, all like 12 parts. So such a better viewing experience. Go watch it on Disney Plus. Again, that's Let It Be, the original film remastered from Peter Jackson, the directed feature by Micheal Lindsay Hogg. Let's go check that out. So when we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Nintendo Switch 2, why none of it matters, and a little bit of Yankees baseball. When we come back, we're going to try to stimulate another hitter to have a fantastic 5-game stretch, just like we did with Aaron Judge. More on that after the break. Hey, welcome back to the show. Before we get on to that Nintendo Switch 2 stuff, I found the list of roasts that have happened before, right? That I had pulled up. This is from Wikipedia, right? But I guess the roast started from like as a segment on the Dean Martin show, and let me push over here to this list. So they have the episodes are Ronald Reagan, Hugh Hefner, Ed McMahon, Kirk Douglas, Betty Davis, right? Like there's some expected stuff. One of the Carol O'Connor, who played Archie on All in the Family. Jack Klugman and Tony Randall. Those are the odd couple from the old ones. One of the funny or more humorous ones is, which I guess I lied. Now I'm starting to get interested in the roast. George Washington, portrayed by Jan Leighton. I don't know. Somebody will correct me. Leonard Barr, Foster Brooks as Washington's press secretary, and Jack Carter, Yul Given, Steve Lawrence as Washington's aide-de-camp, and Audrey Meadows as Martha Washington. That episode needs a remaster because that seems hilarious and such a bizarre thing. And then they went on Bob Hope, Lucille Ball, Muhammad Ali, Peter Marshall, Frank Sinatra. Who's Peter Marshall? Anyway, so I just thought that was kind of interesting because that seemed like something that they're like, why don't we just try to roast a fictional person? That seems like something kind of interesting. But anyways, let's get on to the last couple moments of the show here. There has been rumors about the Switch 2, the successor to the ultra successful Nintendo platform, the Switch. And it looks like some leaks have been going on. This is an article from Kotaku that I'm getting this from. And they say, quote, while a follow-up to the Switch is inevitable as night following day, its existence was only finally made officially official earlier this week. At the same time, we've seen dribs and drabs of leaks about screen sizes, controller changes, and other minutiae for months, if not years. But today, Android Authority is collating the leaks with major specs and a launch window. That, again, is a Kotaku article from John Walker. And they basically leaked out that it might be with a oft-rumored NVIDIA Tegra T239, 256 gigs of internal storage, and it's aiming for a March 2025 release, which would actually kind of fall in line with how they released the last one in March 2017. It's aiming to be physically and digitally backwards compatible, and it says micro SD cards for additional storage. Yeah, and it seems like, and I know there were earlier reports about a magnetic Joy-Con and all that kind of stuff. One of the funny things about this story is that I felt like in 2016, and maybe because that was following the complete failure of the Wii U, there was more rumored reports about NX, what the code name was, and what it could possibly mean, and there were trademark filings that people would dissect and people would get into the weeds about, and not as much of this anymore. And maybe because we just know that it would be kind of a dumb move to not feature the same kind of specs that this one has just dominated the market with. There were rumors that it can be a 4K screen. It might not be a 4K screen. It might be something a little bit lower. Basically, the article kind of goes on to say that like it will be kind of more powerful than a PS4. Like all this stuff, and again, it goes back to my original point. It doesn't matter, right? Because everybody can scream and yell to the mountains that Nintendo should make a really, really powerful platform that can handle the current gen games and all that kind of stuff. They won't. They won't do that. Nintendo has been historically, ever since the GameCube, not fighting with that market. They've been behind the curve in terms of making their machines powerful. I think they purposely do that so they can drive the cost down. So you're not buying a $600 box to play, the latest and greatest games. But it all comes down to, again, software, right? Like when you're playing a Mario game, you're hardly thinking about, wow, this thing looks beautiful on the Integra chip, or this works great on a, this graphics card. It's like you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about the gameplay, right? And you're thinking about the narrative of the story. Like that's what makes their stuff jump, right? And if their technology that they're working with can support the games that they make, they're not going to care about trying to mimic a latest and greatest PC graphics card capability, right? They're not in that same horse race. I don't even know if Xbox is in that horse race anymore. That PlayStation is trying to make this console, right? Like if you're really into that kind of stuff, you're probably building a PC to begin with, right? You're not playing your stuff on Switch. That said, the Switch probably is in dire need. It's about 6-7 years since the debut of the Switch, so it does feel like it's getting older. I know the novelty and the physicality of the machine just kind of feels a little bit old at this point, which is funny because in 2017 it felt new and sleek, especially next to the actual Wii U controller, which felt like a Hasbro toy. Yeah, I mean, if it's coming out 2025, that's great, but this thing's going to live and die again on its software and the games that they can provide, and not necessarily on how powerful it is. I mean, hell, an iPad, a current gen iPad looks a little bit more intense than this thing. In fact, I just got a new phone, and one of the reps at Apple was telling me about they had 4 specs of the iPhone 15, and for the first time ever, they said, well, I said, which one should I get? The 15, the 15 Plus, the 15 Pro, and the 15 Pro Max. And it was the first time ever I'd been confronted with, if you're really going to do some hardcore gaming on the iPhone, you should probably get the Pro Max for its more processing power. And that just never crosses my mind. But maybe that's going to be a consideration going forward. These things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and maybe it has the horsepower to run some pretty good games. I mean, we're already kind of seeing the streaming technology kind of is there. We're seeing attachable controllers use iPhones as screens to beam their games over. Maybe that's going to be a thing going forward, where it's like it's not going to be that uncommon to actually do some of that gaming on an iPad, right, or on an iPhone that you might have reserved for a PC or a PS4. Who knows? But that was just kind of shocking. I was like, I'm never thinking about the processing power in my phone, like ever, for that kind of stuff. To me, that is something that I'm like, if I'm looking for that experience, I'm going somewhere else. I don't know how much processing power Candy Crush takes, but it's not going to be enough for me to pay an extra $300 on my phone. So anyways, so I think these articles are kind of funny. I mean, they're great. It's good that someone has a beat on them. I don't necessarily think that they're necessary, because ultimately the Nintendo Switch is going to come out, and it doesn't matter what the processing power behind it is going to be. It's just going to play the games you want to play, right? And so, hopefully in 2025, it'd be nice to kind of update that system. And with a new system always comes a new onslaught of different games. So that's always an exciting kind of thing to see a reboot. Just to quickly put a button on this, I think Nintendo's lineup this year is a lot of like remakes of old games in the summer, including like a Paper Mario game that's coming out, the 1,000-Year Door. Usually when they start remaking games and that's like their slate of the lineup, it usually means that they're gearing up for something, right? That they're gearing up. And we haven't seen a new 3D Mario in 7 years. So that seems promising, right? Except for Bowser's Fury, that little addition they put on 3D World. But anyway, so let's move on a little bit to some sports talk. Let's get some Yankees. The Yankees took 2 out of 3 from the Houston Astros, which would have been such an accomplishment a couple years ago when the Astros seemed like a good team. They don't seem like a good team at all this year. And even though they're sitting at what are they? Astros sitting at, right? They just took the last game from the Yankees here, 4-3 last night. 13-24. I mean, they're abysmal. But that said, with the way that the Astros got into the playoffs in 2020, I think like a game under 500, right? So no one's truly out of it. They're only 8 games back, but they're not a good team. And so the Yankees taking 2 out of 3 it should be almost expected. They snapped their 8-game winning streak against Houston, and the more encouraging thing from that was Aaron Judge's just absolute dominant performance. Finally coming out of his streak, of his slump. He started off slow, batting around 200, getting booed by the Yankees fans. You know that's going to be getting ejected, calling arguing balls and strikes. It just didn't look judging him. Until last night, again, hitting a bomb. Let's take a look at this. This is the furthest. This is the furthest hit home run in the majors so far. Holy crap! Right above the Bet 365 sign. That is a long shot. Projected home run distance 473 feet. Now, if you're hitting a ball 473 feet, you might not be hitting a ball as fast as Stanton at 120 miles per hour, but you know that your game has very much elevated. Aaron Judge dominating and really looking more like himself every single day. In the last 5 games, how many hits does he have in the last 5 games here? He's got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9. Whew. I do quick math. 8, 11, 14, 19. So what is that? 8 for 19? Is that right? 9 for 19 in the last 5 games. That's what you want to see out of Aaron Judge. 9 for 19. And with 3 home runs, that is more akin. And if you have Soto, Judge, and Stanton, who seems to be swinging a good bat right now, that's what you need to happen. So we called it with Stanton, and Stanton erupted, that he was slumping. We called Aaron Judge was slumping. We said, hey, you got to wake up. And he's woken up. The next guy that I'm going to call, I'm going to basically put him on the hot seat right now, is my man Gleyber Torres. 3 hits in the last 5 games. Gleyber, this is your walk year. You got to get going. And no matter how much pressure it is, if you don't hit, you don't get paid, bud. So what I want to see tonight, the Yankees start a series against the Tampa Rays. They're a half game behind the Orioles as of right now. And we need him at the bottom of the order. I want Boone to switch him to the top of the order because I don't think Volpe actually belongs up there. I think Volpe's more dynamic when he's actually lower in the order. But Gleyber, if you're going to stay down in the 7 hole, we need you to pick it up, bring some life to the bottom of the lineup. Trevino is swinging a good bat. Wells is swinging a good bat, but that may not last that long. And that 9 hole, whoever's in it, whether it be Birdie or Cabrera or what have you, I don't want to depend on that. I want to see Gleyber Torres really round out that lineup, get some hits, get on the ball. So he's on call for this week. And we'll check back in with him next week for a good 5-game stretch. We're talking about the Rays, and who else is coming up? I got to look that up. But you're going to the Trop. You might as well make a good situation out of a bad situation because no one likes going to the Trop. Also, look out for Aaron Judge to DH pretty much all 3 games this week, this series, just so they don't have to put him on the turf. Gleyber, let's go. He's a good part of that lineup. I like seeing him in there a lot. He's a casual fielder, but he makes some good plays. That toss play with the glove the other day, long toss with the glove was a beautiful play. But I want to see him get some hits because happy Gleyber is a happy lineup. So. Anyways, that will wrap up the show for this week, guys. Thank you guys for listening to episode 19. We'll be back next week with more topics that I want to talk about that I always forget to kind of go out with that kind of slogan. But But go ahead and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Listen to it on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on all the platforms. We have shorts going out, and we've got full episodes on YouTube. We're going to have experiment with some clips of the show. So I'll probably clip out the Let It Be section and put that out. So go ahead, like, comment, positive comments, please. Constructive comments, please. And let's have fun on this channel. That's what this channel is about, having fun. That's what the show is about. So go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week. See you later, guys. Bye.